Hey everyone, welcome to the RotoPros pre-lock show for Sunday afternoon. Just waiting for a couple of these lineups to come out, but it looks like we won't have all of them at least right away. I think maybe one more just came out, but there are a couple we're still waiting on. So hopefully we get those by the end and I can weigh in on those teams. It does look like Mike Moustakas is resting today. That's the news that we just got. The Royals lineup just came out, so I'll get to them at some point. But starting with pitching, Chris Sale, I think, is the best play on today's slate for the high end. He's facing the Braves at home, which is a pretty tough matchup, but 11,800 is also just a pretty low price for Sale. He's been, over the last couple of years, just priced way higher than that at times. He is at home, so he gets the boost there. And the wind is blowing in pretty strongly in Boston today. And we also have pretty cold temperatures. So the ball is not really going to be carrying at all. There's not a lot of risk for home runs there. The Braves lineup is good, but I still think that the rest of the circumstances favor Sale enough that it offsets how good the Braves lineup is, even though they are better against lefties and they don't strike out that much. That's really just one factor going against Sale being underpriced in a really strong pitcher's park, the way that Fenway is going to be playing today. And home field advantage. I think it all sets up really well for Chris Sale. And we can look at the line movement here for the under in this game too. It's really significant. So the total for this game opened at 8.5, and it's now down to almost 7. We've had over a full run of line movement towards the under, and it's actually almost a run and a half. So very, very significant. It's actually only the second strongest line movement on an under today. There are a couple other games that are similar and one that's actually more. And the Red Sox are minus 235 favorites. That number is kind of just stayed where it is. So the implied run total for the Braves is really low. Sale can rack up strikeouts against anybody. So I think he's the guy to pay up for. I don't think Strasburg is a bad play. It is a road game for him, and he is a little bit more expensive than Chris Sale. So he's kind of just a secondary choice for me. I don't think it's a bad price at 12,600 because the Marlins are an easy matchup. They're not a good offense. But I think Sale is just better than Strasburg overall as a pitcher. And given the weather circumstances in Boston, I actually don't know how much harder of a matchup it is for Sale. Also factoring in home field advantage, Strasburg is on the road. So I think using Strasburg a little bit makes sense if you have enough lineups, but in a small number of lineups or even maybe in 20 lineups, I think Sale over Strasburg is the call to make every time, or at least almost every time. So I think that one's pretty straightforward on the high end. There are a couple other expensive pitchers that I don't have interest in at all. Garrett Cole's 11,600, but that's a tough matchup on the road in Cleveland. And with so many park downgrades or upgrades for pitchers, downgrades for hitters today, it really, I think, makes the most sense to target the pitchers that are in these bad weather games where the ball is not really going to be carrying. And Cleveland is not one of those games today. The over-under for that game has actually gone up. And sharps have been on the over throughout this entire Houston-Cleveland series. And I think the over has hit in every game. They've all been pretty high scoring. I think the weather in Cleveland has been conducive to offense. I think we have a hitter's umpire there, although that one I'm less sure of. But this is another game where we have line movement to the over, despite the fact that almost everyone is betting on the under with a premier pitching matchup. So I do not like Trevor Bauer or Garrett Cole today. I think they're pretty bad options. So it's Sale mostly. I think Strasburg's okay, and I have zero interest in Trevor Bauer and Garrett Cole. Let's see. The mid-tier of pitching doesn't really look that appealing, although it's another game in here where weather favors pitchers a lot. So Jay Happ versus Nick Pivetta, that's another game in Philly where the wind should be blowing in, and it does look pretty cold there. Weather's a little more scary there in terms of a possible delay or a PPD. So I'm not sure if the risk is worth it. And Happ and Pivetta are just not close to the same level as Chris Sale. So I'd rather kind of just pay up for Sale and then use a cheaper option. But I do think Pivetta and Happ are both sort of in play. I just think there are so many better pitching choices on this slate that they kind of just missed the cut today. They're not really that cheap. I mean, Happ is priced right at his baseline, Pivetta too. I think both of them are kind of fairly priced, and the matchups are slightly positive because of the weather. They're not really positive because of their opponents, kind of just neutral matchups for both. So I think those guys are just not really the best choices today. I think on a smaller slate with less pitching options, they'd be fine, but I don't really like either of them. Both could have big games. They're both good strikeout pitchers, especially this year, but it's just weather risk and better options. So I'm fading there. And the other guy in the mid-range I think is an okay play would be Kevin Gausman, but I think, again, there are better choices, and Gausman hasn't gotten a ton of strikeouts this year. I think Mike Fultonavich, with JD Martinez being out for the Red Sox, could be an interesting contrarian pick. No one is going to use him against Boston today. I'm just going to take a quick look at this Red Sox lineup. Dustin Pedroia is in there for Martinez, it looks like, and then Nunez, I think, is playing in the outfield. Yeah, it's still not quite cheap enough for Fultonavich, and I think you'll see why in a second when I give up some of these prices of these cheaper pitchers, and probably a lot better spots than Fultonavich at Fenway against the Red Sox, even with Martinez out. So my favorite pitcher on the slate by quite a lot actually is Jameson Taillon, and I don't really think Taillon is that good at all. He was priced like an ace, actually, at one point earlier this year. I think his price was over $11K twice. Over the last 2 years now, though, and I guess I'll give off his career numbers, Taillon has a 4.08 ERA, 3.68 FIP, 3.72 xFIP. He's been a little worse than that this year, but I think those are kind of just fair numbers for him. I think he's just kind of a mid-rotation starter, nothing special. Not too much of a strikeout pitcher, although his career average is 8 Ks per 9. I think that's just kind of fair for him. His swinging strike percentage this year is a career high slightly, but I think that just looking at the full picture for Taillon to this point is kind of just reasonable. He's had plenty of ups and downs. At times he's looked like a real ace, but I think we're looking at just a mildly above average pitcher. I think he's just kind of okay. This matchup, though, against the Cardinals it's really favorable for him, I think. And his price at $5,800 is just very low. So, yeah, first it's the price. I mean, $5,800 for an average pitcher at home against the Cardinals in a pitcher's park in the National League where a pitcher's batting, that's too low to begin with. But Taillon has really, really severe righty-lefty splits. They weren't quite as extreme last year, although he was definitely better against righties last season. But this year against lefties, Jameson Taillon is striking out 7.4 batters per 9 innings, walking 5.5, 557 FIP, 489 xFIP. So he's been pretty awful against lefties. It's really a nightmare for him against left-handed batters. But against righties, Taillon has 9.3 Ks per 9 and 0.3 walks per 9. So he's walking no one. It's a 26% K rate and a 1% walk rate against right-handed batters this year, which equates to a 281 FIP and a 292 xFIP. So Taillon's been really, really good against righties. Despite the struggles, he's certainly been good against righties. And the Cardinals lineup today has 2 left-handed batters. They usually don't have any more than that, but I guess there's the potential for them to play a couple switch hitters. Today, it looks like they are just playing Matt Carpenter and Colton Wong. Dexter Fowler's not in there. They're going with Tyler O'Neill instead, which, I mean, even though O'Neill is probably a better hitter than Fowler, because he's right-handed, I think it's actually better for Jameson Taillon. So this right-hand heavy lineup, and Jameson Taillon's at home, Pitchers Park in Pittsburgh, and he's really, really cheap. It's really hard to pass him up. I think there's a case to be made that he should be in nearly every, if not every single lineup today. That's as much of an underprice for a matchup as I think there's been this year. There's been a lot. DraftKings has made some strange mistakes, but Taillon, I think, is by far the best value of anyone. And there's some risk. Well, there's always risk with any pitcher. I mean, anyone can have a bad game on any day. And it's not like the Cardinals' offense is bad, but Taillon against righties is a really, really good pitcher. So he should cost way more than he does. And I think he makes for a very strong play today. So he's my favorite pitcher by far. He's the priority over Chris Sale. And I guess Sale is number 2. The other pitcher that I have interest in is Masahiro Tanaka. And it's kind of hard to figure out what Tanaka is. He is striking out a batter per inning, which is a lot less than he did last year. His overall numbers are just kind of average, although he does pitch in the AL East. So given that, I mean, he's probably an above average pitcher. But the matchup today against the Angels is pretty easy given their lineup. It has Mike Trout in it, so that's always going to be difficult. But there's not a lot to worry about outside of Trout. So Justin Upton got hurt yesterday. He's out of the lineup. Shohei Ohtani is in there, but this is not a good lineup. Valbuena 5, Kinsler 6, Maldonado 7, Calhoun 8, Chris Young 9. Not a very scary bottom of the order. Kozar, Trout, Simmons, Ohtani at the top. I mean, it's pretty solid, mostly just because of Trout, though. So Tanaka should be able to rack up strikeouts against this team. And I mentioned before that there was some very, very strong line movement on the under in the Red Sox game. The Yankee game is the one that actually has even stronger line movement, where it's also cold, the wind is blowing in. The over-under opened at 9.5, and it's all the way down to 8. I think it actually almost reached 7.5 at one point. So I think Tanaka, because of the line movement, it looks favorable, but it's a cheap price for him too. He's at, I think it was 50. Let me find that again. 6,700 for Tanaka. So it's a better price for Tyone in a better matchup, in a better park. The weather does benefit Tanaka, but I strongly prefer Tyone to Tanaka. But I do think Tanaka is the third best choice. I think Garrett Richards for a lot of the same reasons. He's priced at 6,000. He's just a lot better of a pitcher than that. So I think he's worth a look as a contrarian play. But I think Tyone and Sale is definitely the focus here. I think Zach Wheeler is kind of in a similar spot to Garrett Richards. He is 5,500 at Milwaukee, so he's probably worth looking at too. But I would probably just have a little bit of exposure to all of these guys and just be very heavy on Tyone and Sale today. So for offense, I don't think there are too many spots that we need to look at too much. There's one very, very obvious game, and that's Coors Field. But especially today, I mean, Coors Field is always an obvious place to look for offense, but the weather today we have, let's see. Well, I guess it's not so much the weather, it's more the pitching matchup, which is a very bad one, especially on one side of it. But I'm just looking at the weather again for Colorado. So it is warm at least, temperatures in the mid to high 80s, so that is helpful for offense. But Matt Harvey versus German Marquez, especially Harvey, is just still awful. Despite the results of his last, I guess, 2 of his last 3 starts, he hasn't allowed a lot of runs. But he's still, like, his numbers for the year are still really, really bad. He's giving up a ton of hard contact. He's giving up a ton of fly balls. And he's done most of this as a reliever. Maybe not most, but he's done some of it as a reliever. So it's kind of inflated his numbers, and maybe they should be actually worse as a starting pitcher. We don't have lineups for either of these teams yet for the Rockies and Reds. So can't say too much about them now, but I think the Rockies against Matt Harvey are a fairly obvious play. I think ownership is a little bit of a concern, but they're really not even that expensive. Blackman and Arenado are 5,600 and 5,300, which is just kind of standard for them. David Dahl is 4,000. Gerardo Parra is 3,500. Maybe Carlos Gonzalez plays. Okay, looks like we do have a Rockies lineup. Let's see. Load the page. Where are you, Rockies lineup? All right, hang on, everyone. Let's see if we can find this Rockies lineup. And then, yeah, there really are, I think there's probably 4 or 5 offenses that are in really strong spots today. The Rockies and Reds are 2 of them for sure. More so on the Rockies side, because I think German Marquez, at least, he's better than Harvey, and the Rockies do have a decent bullpen, but the Reds definitely are in a good situation too. Not seeing this Rockies lineup. Where, okay, there we go. So Parra is out. Carlos Gonzalez is in. Cargo's price is at, where are you, Carlos Gonzalez? 4,000, is that? No. Okay, 3,600 for Carlos Gonzalez. Okay, that is very cheap. So Cargo is definitely a strong play today. I think David Dahl is a strong play. I think Rocky Stacks makes sense. I really just don't like Trevor Story against righties, and he's really expensive, but for stacks, I guess he's okay to include. The player on the Rockies I like the least is Ian Desmond because he's just awful. He doesn't get hits against anybody. I think Ryan McMahon is a good plug, though. He's at 2,700. So the priorities for me on the Rockies, I think it's Gonzalez 1, Dahl 2, McMahon 3, and then Blackmon and Arenado. Mild interest in Story, mild interest in Wolters. He's not a good hitter either, but at least he's cheap, and almost zero interest in Ian Desmond. We don't have a Reds lineup yet, but I think assuming the usual guys are in there, I think all of them are good plays. Tucker Barnhart at 3,600, I think, is a really strong catcher play. He sat out yesterday, so I'm assuming he'll be in there. Okay, so other offenses. I think Rockies are number 1. I think the Rangers maybe are number 2. Jason Hamill is awful, and this is still a pretty cheap Texas lineup. The only players priced over 4,000 are Shin-Soo Choo and Nomar Mazara. Gallo is actually down to 3,800. Strong hitters environment in Texas. So I think the Rangers are a good stack. I think the Tigers are a good stack because James Shields. But it's warm in Detroit today. I think the ball should carry a bit more. Leonys Martinez back in the lineup. Jeimer Candelario is back in the lineup. So I think 1 through 4 of the Tigers are definitely very appealing. So I think that's kind of a push for second best offense after the Rockies. And I guess between all 3 of these teams, the Reds, Tigers, and Rangers. Those are my second, third, fourth favorite offenses, kind of interchangeable after the Rockies at number 1. And then the other offense that I think is in a really good spot and the line movement really, really strongly supports them is the Mets against Jhoulys Chacin. The Mets lineup is a little bit strange today. They are starting Jose Bautista over Brandon Nimmo. And Nimmo has been really good lately. So I think this – and Chacin also is a lot worse against lefties. So I think that this Mets lineup kind of hurts them a bit. I think they're a fairly distant number 5, but I do think they should be pretty contrarian. I might just have more interest in this point at Michael Conforto as a plug at 3,800. But I think Mets stacks are probably worth having at least a little bit. But I'm definitely now prioritizing those other 4 offenses at this point. So both sides of the Coors game, the Rangers offense, the Tigers offense. I think the White Sox have a couple good plugs with Tim Anderson and Jose Abreu, although first base today, let's see. How much Abreu is it realistic to use? I mean, I guess you can use Gallo in the outfield, but there are so many good outfielders to use that I probably will have Gallo at first in a lot of lineups. And then from Coors, the Rockies don't really have a first baseman because Ian Desmond is the worst player in baseball. But Ryan McMahon, you can play at first. And I think I'll probably have him a lot because Arenado plays third. And then Joey Votto, I think, is a good play too. So kind of light on Abreu, but I think Tim Anderson, if there's anyone to use from the White Sox, I think he's the play. 36 fantasy points yesterday. He's really good against lefties, so I guess that's the reason to have him in there against Blaine Hardy, who's not very good. All right, so what else do we have here? It doesn't look like there are too many other good offensive spots. It really seems like those 4 primarily, Rockies, Reds, Rangers, Tigers, with maybe some interest in the Mets, although less with Nimmo out of the lineup. I think the Royals are definitely going to be contrarian against Cole Hamels. I probably just like Whit Merrifield, and I guess it is a lot of righties, though. Salvador Perez is interesting. Jorge Soler, I think, is interesting. It's just a really bad lineup after that. So I don't like the Rockies too much, but I think kind of like 2 through 4 there for plugs or mini stack. That makes some sense. And we'll just kind of have to see what the Reds lineup is closer to lock because we don't have that yet. So can't really weigh in too much there. But I think that probably does it. Just looking to see if there's anything I've missed here with some cheaper value or anything like that. Let's see. I think that's probably it, though. Juan Soto is still priced pretty cheap, and I don't think Eliezer Hernandez is good, but there are so many outfielders to use. I think the Nationals missed the cut today. I think the weather is too concerning in both New York and Boston to use those offenses. So, yeah, that's going to do it. Again, Jameson Taillon, best play on the slate. I think Sale is good to use. Tanaka, possibly Richards, possibly Wheeler, possibly even Pivetta or Happ, but definitely focusing on those first couple guys. And then Rockies, Reds, Rangers, and Tigers. Those are the offenses, and maybe some Mets. So good luck, everyone. Hopefully that all works out. Should be back tomorrow for regular time, regular slate, and see you then.